The eviction notice felt cold between my fingers as I slid it under my parents' front door. 24 hours earlier, I had been their beloved daughter, Sarah, the responsible one who always did the right thing. Now I was their landlord, and they had 30 days to pay rent or get out of what they thought was going to be their forever home. The same home I had purchased 3 weeks ago while they were busy giving away my wedding fund to my screw-up brother, Jake. Let me back up and tell you how we got here, because this story doesn't start with revenge. It starts with trust, family dinners, and dreams of a perfect wedding. Crafting and presenting this story required considerable dedication and time. Investment. If you're finding this content enjoyable, please consider subscribing and activating notifications to stay updated on all our upcoming episodes. 6 months ago, I was living in a completely different reality. My life revolved around wedding planning, spreadsheets color-coded by priority, and a growing savings account that represented 3 years of sacrifices. While my friends went on weekend trips and bought designer handbags, I packed lunches, skipped happy hours, and drove my beat-up Honda Civic instead of financing something newer. Every dollar had a purpose. My dream wedding to Marcus, the man who had waited patiently while I built our future one careful financial decision at a time. My parents, Linda and Robert Chen, had been my biggest cheerleaders throughout this journey. Mom would text me pictures of flower arrangements she saw at the grocery store, and Dad actually started a Pinterest board called Sarah's Big Day that he was embarrassingly proud of. When I first told them about Marcus's proposal 2 years ago, they made a promise that felt like winning the lottery. "Sweetheart, we've been saving for this day since you were born," Mom had said, tears in her eyes as she held my hand across their kitchen table. "We have $60,000 set aside for your wedding. We want you to have everything you've ever dreamed of." $60,000. Combined with my own savings, it meant I could have the venue at Riverside Manor, the photographer whose work made me cry happy tears, and a dress that would make me feel like a queen. It meant Marcus and I could start our marriage without the crushing debt that seemed to follow so many couples these days. The planning consumed my evenings and weekends for months. I researched vendors, compared prices, and negotiated contracts with the precision of a corporate lawyer. Marcus joked that I had missed my calling as a wedding planner, but the truth was, I just wanted everything to be perfect. This wasn't just a party. It was the foundation of our life together, and every detail mattered. My parents were involved in every decision. Mom came to dress appointments and cried when I found the one, a stunning A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves that made me feel like I was floating. Dad insisted on tasting the food at 3 different catering companies, declaring himself the official quality control inspector. They seemed as invested in this wedding as I was, maybe more. Jake, my older brother by 3 years, was a different story entirely. While I was building my career as a marketing coordinator and saving every penny, Jake was living his best life in a series of disasters disguised as opportunities. There was the food truck business that lasted 4 months before he got bored. The cryptocurrency investment that lost him $12,000. The girlfriend who convinced him to move to Portland for her art, only to dump him 6 weeks later, leaving him stranded and broke. Each time Jake crashed and burned, Mom and Dad were there with open arms and open wallets. They called it helping family, but I called it enabling. Still, I kept my mouth shut because that's what good daughters do. I focused on my own life, my own goals, and tried not to keep score of how many times my parents had bailed out my brother, while praising me for being so responsible and independent. The first crack in my perfect wedding plans appeared on a Tuesday morning in March. I was at work, putting together a social media campaign for our biggest client, when my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Can you come over tonight? Dad and I need to talk to you about something important." My stomach dropped. In my family, something important usually meant bad news was coming. I spent the rest of the day imagining scenarios: Dad's job, Mom's health, some financial crisis that would impact their contribution to the wedding. I never imagined what actually happened. Marcus offered to come with me for moral support, but I declined. Whatever this was, I wanted to face it alone first. I drove to my childhood home with my heart hammering against my ribs, running through various speeches in my head about how we could make the wedding work on a smaller budget if needed. Mom answered the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dad was waiting in the living room, sitting forward on the couch with his hands clasped between his knees, his classic, serious conversation posture that I remembered from childhood lectures about homework and curfews. "Sit down, honey," Mom said, settling beside Dad. "We need to discuss the wedding fund." The way she said, "the wedding fund," with that careful, gentle tone made my chest tighten. I perched on the edge of the armchair across from them, my hands gripping the upholstered arms. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Are you guys having money problems? Because if you can't contribute as much, I understand. We can figure something out." Dad cleared his throat. "Sarah, we love you so much, and we want your wedding to be beautiful. But Jake is in a really tough spot right now, and he needs our help." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire I couldn't yet see. I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "What kind of tough spot?" I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. "He owes some people money," Mom said quickly. "Bad people, Sarah. He got involved with the wrong crowd in Portland, and if he doesn't pay them back, they're going to hurt him." My blood went cold. "How much money?" $58,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $58,000. Almost exactly what they had promised me for my wedding. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "What does this have to do with my wedding fund?" But even as I asked the question, I could see the answer in their faces, in Mom's guilty expression and Dad's refusal to meet my eyes. "We're giving the wedding fund to Jake," Dad said, the words tumbling out in a rush like he was ripping off a bandage. "We don't have a choice, Sarah. These aren't the kind of people you can negotiate with or ask for a payment plan. If Jake doesn't pay them back by Friday, they're going to break his legs." The living room seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the armchair harder, my knuckles turning white against the familiar floral fabric that Mom had chosen when I was in high school. Everything in this room was exactly the same as it had been for years. The family photos on the mantel, Dad's reading glasses on the side table, the throw pillows Mom rearranged obsessively. But nothing would ever be the same again. "You're giving away my wedding fund," I repeated, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "The money you've been saving for me since I was born. The money you promised me 6 months ago. The money I've been planning my entire future around. Honey, we know how much this means to you," Mom said, reaching toward me with her hand outstretched. I pulled back instinctively and hurt flashed across her face. "But Jake is family. He's in real danger. You can have a beautiful wedding on a smaller budget." "Smaller budget?" The words exploded out of me as reality crashed down like a wave. "Mom, I've already put deposits down on everything. The venue, the photographer, the caterer. I've spent $8,000 of my own money on deposits based on your promise. Money I can't get back." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "We'll help you figure out how to make it work with what you've saved. Weddings don't have to cost so much anyway. When your mother and I got married, don't." I held up my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Do not tell me how you got married for $300 in 1985. Do not minimize what you're doing to me right now by pretending this is about wedding costs." The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I could hear the grandfather, clock in the hallway ticking away the seconds, marking time in a world that had just shifted completely off its axis. "How much does Jake actually owe?" I asked quietly. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. "We told you, 58,000. How much does Jake owe, and how much of that is money you've already given him over the years that he never paid back?" Another long pause. Dad's jaw tightened. "That's not fair, Sarah." "Fair?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about how I've been the perfect daughter for 26 years. How I got straight A's while Jake was getting suspended. How I paid for my own college while you funded his 4 different degree attempts. How I've never asked you for a single dollar since I graduated, while Jake has been treating you like his personal ATM. Your brother is struggling, Mom began. My brother is 31 years old. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the neighborhood looked exactly the same as always. Neat lawns, quiet streets, the kind of suburban perfection my parents had worked their whole lives to achieve. When does it end? When do you stop enabling him and start letting him face the consequences of his choices? These aren't normal consequences, Dad said firmly. These people will hurt him. And you're hurting me. The words ripped out of my throat. You're destroying my wedding, my future, my trust in you. But that's okay because I'm the responsible one, right? I'm the one who will figure it out, who will make it work, who will smile and pretend everything is fine while Jake gets rescued. Again. I turned back to face them, and for the first time in my life, I saw my parents clearly, not as the loving, supportive figures I'd always believed them to be, but as people who had spent decades playing favorites without even realizing it. Jake was their project, their child who needed saving. I was their success story, their child who didn't need anything. Have you even told Jake about this? I asked. Does he know you're sacrificing my wedding to save him? Mom's face crumpled. He feels terrible about it. He never wanted this to happen. But he's taking the money anyway. He doesn't have a choice. There's always a choice, I said. He could have made better choices a long time ago. He could have chosen not to get involved with dangerous people. He could have chosen to get a real job instead of chasing get-rich-quick schemes. He could choose to figure this out himself instead of running to Mommy and Daddy one more time. Dad stood up, his face flushed with anger. That's enough, Sarah. He's your brother. Family helps family. Then why aren't you helping me? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I'm family too. My dreams matter too. My future matters too. But you're willing to sacrifice all of that for Jake, just like you always have. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the handle. Sarah, wait, Mom called after me. Don't leave like this. We can talk about it, figure something out. No, I said without turning around. You've made your choice. You picked Jake over me just like you always do. But this time there are consequences for that choice. Real consequences. I walked out of my childhood home with my parents' voices calling after me, but I didn't look back. In my car, I sat in their driveway for 10 minutes with my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. My wedding fund was gone. 3 years of careful planning, down the drain because my brother couldn't stay, out of trouble. But as I sat there, a different kind of clarity began to emerge through the rage and hurt. My parents had made their choice, and now I would make mine. They thought they knew me. Responsible Sarah, dependable Sarah, Sarah who would quietly accept whatever they decided and find a way to make it work. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I pulled out my phone and opened a real estate app I'd been browsing casually for months. There was one house I'd looked at over and over again, a beautiful colonial on Oak Street that had been on the market for 6 months. The price had dropped twice, and I knew why my parents hadn't been able to afford it on Dad's teacher salary and Mom's part-time bookkeeping income, but I could afford it. With my savings, my excellent credit, and my steady job, I could absolutely afford it. My parents had spent 3 years watching me plan my dream wedding, nodding along as I talked about venues and flowers and photographers. What they didn't know was that I'd also been watching them. I knew about their Sunday drives past the house on Oak Street. I knew about the times Mom had pulled up the listing on her phone at dinner, sighing over the granite countertops and the master suite with the walk-in closet she'd always wanted. I knew exactly what their dream home looked like, and I was about to buy it. The house at 847 Oak Street was even more beautiful in person than it had looked in the online photos. I stood on the wraparound porch the next morning, watching the real estate agent fumble with the lockbox, and felt a surge of satisfaction that surprised me with its intensity. This wasn't just a house, it was justice served on a silver platter with granite countertops and hardwood floors. The owners are highly motivated, Janet Morrison, the listing agent, explained as she pushed open the front door. It's been on the market for 8 months now. They've already relocated for work and need to sell quickly. I nodded, following her into the foyer with its soaring ceilings and chandelier that caught the morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows. I didn't mention that I'd been tracking this listing obsessively since January, watching the price drops and calculating mortgage payments in my head during sleepless nights. The kitchen was completely renovated 2 years ago, Janet continued, leading me toward the back of the house. Quartz countertops, stainless steel appliances, custom cabinetry. I barely heard her words as we walked through rooms that I had memorized from late-night browsing sessions. The kitchen with its massive island where Mom had imagined hosting. Holiday dinners. The master bedroom with the tray ceiling that had made Dad's eyes light up when they'd driven by during their Sunday afternoon look but don't touch tours. The 3-car garage that would finally give them space for Dad's woodworking tools and Mom's gardening supplies. Every detail was exactly as I remembered from my parents' wistful descriptions over family dinners. They'd driven past this house dozens of times, slowing down to admire the landscaping and pointing out features to each other like children pressing their faces against a toy store window. "What's your timeline looking like?" Janet asked as we toured the finished basement, with its built-in bar and home theater setup. "I need to move quickly," I said, which was the absolute truth. My parents were planning to transfer the money to Jake by Friday, 3 days away. If I was going to do this, it had to happen now, before my fury cooled or my conscience kicked in. "Can we write up an offer today?" Janet's eyebrows shot up. "Today? Don't you want to think it over? Maybe bring your husband to see it?" "I'm not married yet," I said, the words tasting bitter. "And I've already thought it over. This is the house I want." 2 hours later, I was sitting in Janet's office signing paperwork that would change everything. The offer was fair but not generous. Exactly $10,000 under asking price, with a quick closing and no contingencies. I had enough cash for the down payment thanks to 3 years of careful saving, and my pre-approval letter from the bank was solid gold in a market where financing was getting tighter every month. "The sellers should respond within 24 hours, Janet said, sliding the contract into her folder. "Given how long it's been on the market, I'm optimistic." I drove home to my apartment in a daze, the enormity of what I'd just done beginning to sink in. I was buying a house, not just any house, but the specific house my parents had been dreaming about for 2 years. The house they would never be able to afford on their teacher and bookkeeper salaries, especially not after giving away $60,000 to bail out Jake. That evening, Marcus came over with takeout Chinese food and found me sitting on my couch staring at my laptop screen, which displayed the listing photos of 847 Oak Street. "How did it go with your parents?" he asked, settling beside me with containers of lo mein and orange chicken. We'd been together for 4 years, and he knew my family well enough to read the tension in my shoulders. I told him everything. The betrayal, the confrontation, and finally, my plan for revenge. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. "Sarah," he said carefully when I finished, "I understand why you're angry. What they did was incredibly unfair, but buying their dream house out of spite? That seems like what?" I turned to face him, my voice sharper than I intended. "Like something the responsible daughter wouldn't do? Like something that might actually have consequences for people who hurt me." "Like something you might regret," he said gently. "You're making a huge financial decision while you're angry. This house costs $320,000. That's not exactly pocket change." "I can afford it," I said defensively. I've been pre-approved for up to $400,000. My credit score is excellent, my job is stable, and I have enough saved for the down payment and closing costs. That's not what I'm worried about. Marcus set down his chopsticks and turned to face me fully. I'm worried about you. This isn't like you, Sarah. You're the most level-headed person I know. You research restaurants for 3 days before we go to dinner. You're not the type to make impulsive decisions about houses. Maybe that's the problem, I said. Maybe I've been too level-headed for too long. Maybe it's time people learned that actions have consequences, even when those people are my parents. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Honey, please call me. We need to talk about this like adults. I showed Marcus the message. See? They still don't get it. They think this is just me having a tantrum that they can talk me out of. They have no idea what they've actually done. What have they actually done? Marcus asked quietly. Yes, they broke their promise about the wedding fund. And yes, that was wrong. But Sarah, they're trying to save their son's life. These people Jake owes money to aren't going to send him a strongly worded letter if he doesn't pay up. So that makes it okay to sacrifice my future for his mistakes? No, it doesn't. But it makes it understandable. Marcus reached for my hand. Your parents love both of you. They're in an impossible situation, and they made a choice that hurt you. But buying their dream house just to hurt them back? That's not going to fix anything. I pulled my hand away. You don't understand because your parents have never done this to you. Your parents have never chosen one of your siblings over you, over and over again, for your entire life. You're right, Marcus admitted. I don't understand that, but I understand you, and this isn't who you are. Maybe it's who I need to be. My phone rang at 9:30 that night. Janet Morrison's name appeared on the screen, and my heart started racing before I even answered. Sarah, I have good news. The sellers accepted your offer. Congratulations, you're going to be a homeowner. Crafting and presenting this story required considerable dedication and time investment. If you're finding this content enjoyable, please consider subscribing and activating notifications to stay updated on all our upcoming episodes. I hung up the phone and stared at Marcus, who was watching me with a mixture of concern and resignation. It's done, I said. The house is mine. But even as I said the words, I wondered if Marcus was right. Was I making the biggest mistake of my life, or was I finally standing up for myself after 26 years of being the good daughter who never caused any trouble? I guess I was about to find out. The closing took place on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later, in a sterile conference room that smelled like coffee and broken dreams. I signed my name on document after document while my lawyer, Patricia Wells, explained each form in her calm professional voice. Purchase agreement, mortgage documents, title insurance, homeowner's insurance, each signature binding me deeper into my plan for revenge. Congratulations, Ms. Chen, the title company representative said, sliding a set of keys across the mahogany table. You're now the proud owner of 847 Oak Street. The keys were heavier than I'd expected, solid brass with a decorative keychain that read Home Sweet Home in cursive script. The previous owners had left it behind, probably thinking it would be a nice touch for the new family moving into their former dream house. They had no idea they were handing over the instruments of my parents' destruction. During those 3 weeks between offer acceptance and closing, I had become a master of compartmentalization. At work, I focused on marketing campaigns and client presentations with laser precision. With Marcus, I deflected conversations about the house and my parents with practiced ease. But alone in my apartment at night, I researched landlord-tenant law with the same obsessive attention to detail I'd once devoted to wedding planning. I learned about security deposits and lease agreements, about proper notice periods and eviction procedures. I studied rental rates in my parents' neighborhood and discovered that fair market rent for their current house would be exactly $2,800 per month. Coincidentally, almost exactly what Dad brought home after taxes. from his teaching job. My parents had tried calling me 17 times during those 3 weeks. I'd let every call go to voicemail, listening to their increasingly desperate messages late at night with a mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been guilt if I'd allowed myself to examine it too closely. "Sarah, honey, please, call us back. We can work something out about the wedding." "Sweetheart, your father and I have been talking, and maybe we can find another way to help Jake." "Sarah, this is ridiculous. You can't ignore us forever. We're family." But I could ignore them, and I did. Every unanswered call was a small act of rebellion against 26 years of being the dutiful daughter who always put family harmony above her own needs. The morning after closing, I drove to Oak Street with a locksmith and a plan. The house was empty, echoing with the hollow sound of my footsteps on the hardwood floors my parents had admired from the sidewalk. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny celebrations of my victory. "Beautiful place," said Dave, the locksmith, as he changed all the exterior locks. "You got a steal on this one. I know the neighborhood. Houses like this usually go for 50 grand more." "I got lucky," I said, which was true in more ways than one. Lucky that the previous owners were desperate to sell. Lucky that my credit was excellent and my down payment substantial. Lucky that my parents had spent so many Sunday afternoons driving past this house, unknowingly giving me the ammunition I'd need for my revenge. By noon, I was the sole key holder to 847 Oak Street. The house my parents had dreamed about, planned for, and saved toward for years was now mine. They would never walk through these rooms as owners, never host Christmas dinner in the dining room with its built-in china cabinet, never plant flowers in the garden beds they'd admired from the curb. That afternoon, I drove to a print shop and had 500 copies made of a simple flyer. Beautiful colonial home for rent. 847 Oak Street. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2,800 SQFT granite counters, hardwood floors, 3-car garage, 2,800 month plus utilities. Excellent. Neighborhood, top-rated schools. Available immediately. Contact Sarah Chen for viewing. I included my phone number and a photo of the house's exterior, the same photo my parents had probably screenshot and texted to their friends, captioned with something like, "Someday," or "In our dreams." The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using my marketing skills, honed through years of promoting other people's products, to market my own revenge. I posted the flyer on rental websites, neighborhood Facebook groups, and community bulletin boards. Within hours, my phone was buzzing with inquiries from potential tenants. But I wasn't ready for tenants yet. I had one more piece of business to take care of first. Saturday morning found me parked across the street from my childhood home, watching my parents through their living room window as they drank coffee and read the newspaper. It was such a normal scene, Dad in his reading glasses, Mom curled up in her favorite chair, that for a moment, I almost lost my nerve. Then I remembered Jake, probably sleeping off a hangover in whatever apartment my $60,000 had rented for him. I remembered the casual way my parents had destroyed 3 years of careful planning with a single conversation. I remembered the assumption that responsible Sarah would just figure out how to make everything work, like she always did. I got out of my car and walked up the familiar driveway, my heart pounding with each step. The spare key was still hidden under the fake rock by the front steps. Some things never changed. But I didn't need their key anymore. I had my own keys now, to a much better house. I rang the doorbell instead of using my old key, a small symbolic gesture that felt significant. This wasn't my home anymore. I was a visitor now, maybe even an unwelcome one. Mom opened the door in her bathrobe, her face lighting up with relief and joy when she saw me. "Sarah. Oh, honey, I'm so glad you're here. Come in, come in. Your father's making pancakes." "I'm not staying," I interrupted, noting how quickly her expression shifted from joy to wariness. "I just came to give you something." I held out a manila envelope, thick with documents I'd spent the previous evening preparing. Legal papers, rental applications, lease agreements, everything they would need to understand their new reality. "What is this?" Mom asked, taking the envelope with trembling fingers. "Your future," I said. "I bought your dream house, Mom. 847 Oak Street, the one you and Dad drive past every Sunday. The one with the granite countertops and the master suite you've been talking about for 2 years. Her face went white. "You bought our house?" "I bought a house," I corrected. "And now I'm your landlord. You have 30 days to decide whether you want to rent it from me for $2,800 a month or I'll find other tenants. It's a fair price. I checked comparable rentals in the area." Dad appeared behind Mom, his face confused and still holding a spatula from the pancakes he'd been making. "Sarah, what's going on? Your mother looks like she's seen a ghost." "She's seen the future," I said. "The future where actions have consequences, and being family doesn't mean you get to hurt people without any repercussions." The silence that followed my revelation stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Dad's spatula dripped pancake batter onto the welcome mat while Mom stared at the envelope in her hands as if it contained a bomb instead of rental agreements. "You can't be serious," Dad finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, this is insane. You bought a house just to what? Get back at us?" "I bought a house because I could afford it," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos of emotions churning in my chest. "The fact that it happens to be the house you've been dreaming about for years is just poetic justice." Mom's hands were shaking as she opened the envelope and pulled out the lease agreement. Her eyes scanned the pages, taking in the legal language that spelled out her new reality in black and white. $2,800 a month, she read aloud, her voice hollow. "Sarah, you know we can't afford that. Your father's salary barely covers our current mortgage." "Then I guess you'll need to find somewhere else to live," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. Inside, my heart was racing, but outwardly I maintained the same professional demeanor I used in business meetings. "I have 3 other families interested in viewing the property this week." Dad stepped forward, and for the first time in my life, I saw genuine anger in his eyes directed at me. "This is cruel, Sarah. Vindictive and cruel. We raised you better than this." "Did you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you raised me to be the good daughter who accepts whatever scraps you throw her way while Jake gets everything he wants. That's not fair," Mom said, tears starting to stream down her cheeks. "Jake was in danger. And I was collateral damage," I interrupted. "My wedding, my future, my trust in you, all acceptable casualties in the war to save Jake from himself." Again. The word "again" landed with the weight of 26 years of accumulated resentment. Every time Jake had been arrested and they'd bailed him out. Every time he'd lost a job and they'd supported him through months of unemployment. Every time he'd made a bad decision and they'd cushioned the fall with their money, their energy, their endless patience. "Your brother has made mistakes," Dad said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "But that doesn't mean we stop loving him or helping him when he needs us." "What about when I need you?" The words exploded out of me with more force than I'd intended. "What about the daughter who did everything right, who never caused you a moment's worry, who's been planning this wedding for 3 years based on a promise you made? When do I get the kind of unconditional support you give Jake?" Mom wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Honey, you've never needed that kind of support. You've always been so independent, so capable, so disposable," I finished. "So reliable that you can break promises to me without consequences. So stable that you can sacrifice my happiness for Jake's latest crisis and expect me to just understand." The pancake smell from the kitchen was making me nauseous. This house, with its outdated wallpaper and cramped rooms, suddenly felt suffocating. I thought about the spacious kitchen at 847 Oak Street, About the master bedroom suite my parents would never call their own. "We can find the money," Dad said suddenly, desperately. "We can take out a second mortgage, maybe get a loan." "With what collateral?" I asked. "You just gave away $60,000 to Jake. Your credit can't be that great after years of bailing him out of financial disasters. And even if you could qualify for a loan, do you really want to spend the next 15 years paying $2,800 a month to your daughter? Your daughter who you betrayed? Your daughter who you taught that family loyalty only goes one way?" Mom sank into the chair by the door, still clutching the lease agreement. "What do you want from us, Sarah? What will it take to make this right?" For a moment, I considered telling them. I considered explaining that I wanted Jake to face the consequences of his choices for once. I wanted them to acknowledge that what they'd done to me was wrong, that choosing him over me again had real and lasting consequences. I wanted them to understand that being the responsible child shouldn't mean being the expendable child. But looking at their faces, Mom's tear-streaked cheeks and Dad's defeated expression, I realized that nothing I said would make them truly understand. They would see me as the villain in this story, the ungrateful daughter who'd turned cruel and vindictive. They would never see themselves as the parents who'd played favorites for so long that they'd destroyed their relationship, with one child to save the other. "I want you to sign the lease agreement or find somewhere else to live," I said finally. "Those are your options. You have until the end of the month to decide." I turned to leave, but Dad's voice stopped me at the door. "If you do this, there's no going back," he said. "If you evict us, if you force us out of our dreams just to prove a point, you'll lose us forever. Is your anger really worth destroying your family?" I turned back to face him, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt a moment of absolute clarity. "You destroyed this family the moment you chose Jake over me," I said. "I'm just making sure there are consequences for that choice." 3 weeks later, I was standing in the empty master bedroom of 847 Oak Street, directing movers as they brought in furniture for my new tenants. A young couple with twin toddlers who'd fallen in love with the house the moment they'd walked through the front door. They were paying $2,900 a month, and they were thrilled to get it. My parents had found a small rental across town, a 2-bedroom apartment that was all they could afford on Dad's teacher salary. Mom had to give up her part-time bookkeeping job to help with the move, and Dad had started taking on tutoring work to make ends meet. According to my Aunt Carol, who'd become my reluctant source of family information, they looked tired and older than their years. Jake, meanwhile, had disappeared. Again? This time to Las Vegas, where he was supposedly working as a blackjack dealer and getting his life together. The $60,000 that had cost me my wedding and my parents their dream house had bought him exactly 6 months of freedom before his next inevitable crisis. Marcus and I had postponed our wedding indefinitely. He'd stood by me through the worst of the fallout, but I could see the concern in his eyes when he looked at me. I wasn't the same person he'd fallen in love with, the kind, forgiving woman who always put family first. I'd become someone harder, someone who understood that sometimes you have to choose yourself over the people who would sacrifice you without hesitation. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. We love you and miss you. Every day." I deleted the message without responding, just like I'd deleted the 17 others she'd sent over the past month. Love, I'd learned, wasn't enough if it came with conditions and exceptions. If it came with the understanding that you would always be second to someone else's needs. Standing in the house my parents had dreamed of owning, surrounded by another, family's laughter and hope, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that for once in my life, I had refused to be the acceptable casualty in someone else's war. They'd taught me that family meant sacrifice. I'd taught them that sacrifice goes both ways. Crafting. And presenting this story required considerable dedication and time investment. If you're finding this content enjoyable, Please consider subscribing and activating notifications to stay updated on all our upcoming episodes. 6 months after evicting my parents from their dream house, I received an unexpected visitor at my marketing firm's downtown office. I was reviewing campaign analytics for our biggest client when my assistant knocked on my door with an apologetic expression. "Sarah? There's someone here to see you. She says she's your Aunt Carol and it's urgent." Aunt. Carol had been my mother's younger sister and my closest ally in the family since childhood. She was the one who'd slipped me $20 bills at family gatherings and listened to my problems without immediately offering solutions. She was also the one who'd been keeping me updated on my parents' situation through carefully neutral text messages that never took sides. "Carol," I said, standing as she entered my office. She looked older than I remembered, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled and worry lines etched deeper around her eyes. "This is a surprise." "Is it?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk without being invited. "Because I've been trying to reach you for weeks, Sarah. Your parents are in the hospital." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain seated, to keep my expression neutral. "What happened?" "Your father had a heart attack 3 days ago. A massive one. He's stable now, but the doctors say the stress of the past few months didn't help." Carol's eyes searched my face for any sign of emotion. "Your mother hasn't left his side since it happened. She's been sleeping in a chair in the ICU, refusing to come home to that tiny apartment they can barely afford." I picked up a pen from my desk and clicked it methodically, using the small sound to ground myself. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not sure why you're telling me this." Carol's eyebrows shot up. "You're not sure why I'm telling you that your father nearly died?" "My father made his choice when he gave away my wedding fund to bail out Jake for the 100th time," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "He chose Jake over me, just like he always has. I'm simply living with the consequences of that choice." "The consequences?" Carol leaned forward, her voice rising. "Sarah, your father is 62 years old. He's been working 2 jobs since you evicted them, trying to keep up with rent payments and health insurance. The stress of losing the house, of disappointing you, of watching Jake disappear again. It's been eating him alive." I set down the pen and met her gaze directly. "And where was this concern when they were disappointing me? When they were breaking promises they'd made since I was born? When they were teaching me that being the good daughter means being the expendable daughter?" "This isn't about Jake anymore," Carol said, her voice softer now. "This is about you becoming someone your father doesn't recognize. Someone who would rather see her family suffer than forgive them for making an impossible choice." "It wasn't impossible," I replied. "They had options. They could have told Jake to figure it out himself. They could have helped him find other solutions that didn't involve destroying my future. They chose the easy path. Sacrifice Sarah because Sarah always figures things out." Carol was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with the same expression she'd worn when I was a child, trying to convince her I hadn't eaten the last cookie. "Do you know what your father said when he woke up after the surgery?" she asked finally. I didn't respond, but she continued anyway. "He said, 'I need to apologize to Sarah. I need her to know that I'm proud of her for standing up for herself, even if it meant standing up against us.'" The words hit harder than I'd expected, creating a crack in the armor I'd built around my heart over the past 6 months. I thought about Dad in his hospital bed, probably looking small and fragile in a way I'd never seen him before. "He also said something else," Carol continued. "He said that losing you has been worse than losing the house, worse than the financial stress, worse than watching Jake disappear again without so much as a thank you. He said he finally understands what you were trying to tell them, that family loyalty has to go both ways." I turned my chair to face the window, looking out at the city skyline while I tried to process what she was telling me. Somewhere out there, my parents were in a hospital room, probably holding hands and wondering if their daughter would ever forgive them. Somewhere else, Jake was probably creating his next disaster, blissfully unaware that his latest rescue had nearly killed our father. "The house is still mine," I said finally, not turning around. "I'm not giving it back just because Dad had a heart attack." "I'm not asking you to give it back," Carol said. "I'm asking you to visit him, to let him apologize properly, to give yourself the chance to decide whether holding on to this anger is worth losing your father forever." I turned back to face her. "And if I don't? If I decide that what they did is unforgivable, then you live with that choice," Carol said simply. "But you make it as an informed choice, not as a reaction to being hurt. You make it after seeing your father lying in that hospital bed, knowing that he might not have many years left to make amends." After Carol left, I sat in my office for an hour, staring at the contract I'd been reviewing without seeing a single word. My phone buzzed with messages from my team about campaign deadlines and client meetings, but I ignored them all. Instead, I found myself thinking about a conversation I'd had with Marcus the week before. We'd been having dinner at our favorite restaurant, one of the few normal activities we still shared since our relationship had become complicated by my family drama. "Do you ever wonder who you're becoming?" he'd asked, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "Because the woman I fell in love with wouldn't recognize the person you are now. Maybe the woman you fell in love with was too willing to let people walk all over her," I'd replied. "Or maybe," he'd said quietly, "the woman you're becoming is too willing to walk all over other people." At the time, I'd dismissed his words as Marcus being overly dramatic, but sitting in my office, thinking about Dad in a hospital bed and Mom sleeping in an uncomfortable chair, I wondered if there was truth in what he'd said. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I'd been avoiding for months. My finger hovered over Mom's name for several seconds before I finally pressed call. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Sarah?" Her voice was hoarse, probably from crying and lack of sleep. "Oh, sweetheart, is that really you?" "Carol told me about Dad," I said, cutting straight to the point before I could lose my nerve. "How is he?" "He's going to be okay," Mom said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "The doctors say he'll need surgery to put in some stents, but he's going to be okay. Sarah, he's been asking for you constantly. We both have." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 6 months of anger and hurt pressing down on my chest, like a physical thing. "What hospital?" I asked. 20 minutes later, I was in my car, driving toward a conversation I wasn't sure I was ready to have. The intensive care unit smelled like antiseptic and broken promises. I stood outside room 314 for 10 minutes, watching through the small window as Mom sat beside Dad's bed, holding his hand while machines beeped steadily around them. He looked smaller than I remembered, his face pale against the white hospital, pillow, tubes snaking from his nose and arms. This was not how I'd imagined seeing my father again. In my mind, our reunion had always involved him approaching me, hat in hand, ready to acknowledge the damage he'd done and beg for forgiveness. I'd pictured myself in a position of power, graciously deciding whether to grant him redemption. Hadn't pictured him unconscious in a hospital bed, looking vulnerable and mortal in a way that made my chest tighten with unexpected emotion. A nurse approached, her soft-soled shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. "Are you here to see Mr. Chen? Visiting hours end in 30 minutes. "I'm his daughter," I said, the words feeling strange after 6 months of referring to myself as their former daughter, their estranged child, their biggest disappointment. "Oh." The nurse's face brightened. "You must be Sarah. Your mother has been hoping you'd come. She mentioned you live out of state?" I didn't correct her assumption. It was easier than explaining that I lived 20 minutes away, but had chosen absence over forgiveness, pride over family. "Go ahead in," the nurse said gently. "He's been in and out of consciousness today, but he's stable." I pushed open the door, and Mom looked up from her vigil. Her face was a roadmap of exhaustion, dark circles under her eyes, hair that hadn't seen a brush in days, clothes that she'd obviously slept in. When she saw me, her expression crumpled with relief. "Sarah," she whispered, standing so quickly that she nearly knocked over the plastic chair. "You came. I can't believe you came." For a moment, we stood facing each other across the small hospital room, 6 months of hurt and anger stretching between us like a chasm. I could see her wanting to hug me, could see her restraining herself because she wasn't sure if I'd welcome her touch. "How long has he been like this?" I asked, nodding toward Dad's still form. "Since yesterday afternoon. The surgery went well, but he's been sleeping mostly. The doctor says that's normal." Mom's voice was hoarse, probably from explaining the eye situation to relatives and medical staff for 3 days straight. "Sarah, I'm so glad you're here. When Carol said she was going to see you, I was afraid that I wouldn't come." I finished. "You were probably right to be afraid of that." Mom's face fell slightly, but she nodded. I know we don't deserve your forgiveness. What we did was wrong, and we've been living with that knowledge every day since you walked out of our house." I moved closer to Dad's bed, studying his face. Even unconscious, he looked worried, his forehead creased with lines that seemed deeper than they had 6 months ago. His hands, which I remembered as strong and capable from years of teaching woodshop classes, looked frail against the white hospital blanket. "The doctors say stress was a major factor," Mom continued, settling back into her chair. "His blood pressure has been through the roof since we moved to the apartment. He's been working extra hours tutoring students to help make ends meet, and he barely sleeps anymore." "And you blame me for that?" I asked, though without the venom I would have put into the question 6 months ago. "No," Mom said firmly. "We blame ourselves. We blame ourselves for putting you in a position where you felt like buying that house was your only option. We blame ourselves for not seeing how our favoritism toward Jake had been hurting you for years." The word favoritism hung in the air between us. It was the first time either of my parents had acknowledged what I'd been feeling my entire life, that Jake was the child who got rescued while I was the child who was expected to rescue herself. "Jake called yesterday," Mom said quietly. "From Vegas. He wanted to know why Dad was in the hospital, and when I told him about the stress and the money problems, do you know what he said?" I waited, though I could probably guess. He said, "Well, that's not my fault. I didn't ask them to give Sarah my money." Mom's voice was bitter in a way I'd never heard before. "Your brother has never taken responsibility for anything in his life, and we enabled that. We enabled it by always being there to catch him when he fell, and we enabled it by expecting you to understand why he needed catching." Dad stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering. Mom immediately leaned forward, taking his hand in both of hers. "Robert? Honey, can you hear me?" Dad's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening as he took in his surroundings. When his gaze landed on me, standing at the foot of his bed, his face went through a series of emotions: surprise, hope, guilt, and something that might have been relief. "Sarah?" His voice was barely a whisper, rough from the breathing tube they'd removed earlier. "You're here." "I'm here," I confirmed, not moving closer but not backing away either. "I need to tell you something," he said, struggling to sit up slightly. Mom helped him, adjusting his pillows. "I need to apologize for all of it, for choosing Jake over you, for breaking our promise, for not seeing what we were doing to you until it was too late." The words I'd been waiting to hear for 6 months should have felt like victory. Instead, they felt heavy with the weight of everything we'd all lost in the process of getting to this moment. "The money is gone," I said. "Jake spent it and disappeared. You nearly died from the stress of trying to rebuild your lives. I bought your dream house and evicted you from it. Apologizing doesn't undo any of that." "I know," Dad said, his eyes never leaving mine. "But I need you to know that you were right. About everything. About the way we treated you versus Jake. About family loyalty going both ways. About consequences mattering. You were right, and we were wrong, and I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself even though it meant standing up against us. The crack in my armor that had started with Carol's visit widened a little more. This wasn't the groveling apology I'd imagined. This was something harder and more honest. A parent acknowledging that their child had been the adult in the relationship while they'd been acting like children. I don't know how to forgive you, I said, the words coming out more honest than I'd intended. I don't know how to trust you again. I don't even know if I want to. That's okay, Dad said. That's your choice to make. But I need you to know that losing you has been the worst consequence of all of this. Worse than the house. Worse than the money. Worse than this heart attack. Losing you has been the thing that's kept me awake at night. A nurse appeared in the doorway. I'm sorry, but visiting hours are over. You can come back tomorrow morning at 8. I looked at Dad, then at Mom, then back at Dad. 6 months ago, I would have walked out of this room feeling vindicated. My father had apologized, had acknowledged my pain, had admitted I was right. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt exhausted. I'll think about coming back tomorrow, I said, which was more than I'd been willing to offer when I'd walked into this room. That's all we can ask for, Mom said, tears streaming down her cheeks. As I walked back through the hospital corridors toward the parking garage, I realized that revenge was a lot more complicated than I'd thought. I'd gotten everything I'd wanted. The house, the apology, the acknowledgement that I'd been wronged. But sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like someone who'd won a war by burning down everything she'd once called home. I didn't go back to the hospital the next day, or the day after that. Instead, I threw myself into work with the same intensity I'd once devoted to planning my revenge, staying late at the office and accepting every new project that crossed my desk. If I kept busy enough, I reasoned, I wouldn't have to think about Dad's pale face or Mom's exhausted tears. But Marcus had other plans. He showed up at my apartment on Friday evening with takeout Thai food and the determined expression he usually reserved for difficult clients. I knew immediately that this wasn't a casual dinner visit. We need to talk, he said, setting the food containers on my kitchen counter without being invited in. If this is about the hospital visit, I already told you. This isn't about your parents, Marcus interrupted, which surprised me. For months, every serious conversation we'd had somehow circled back to my family drama. This is about us, about where we go from here. I felt my stomach drop. In all the chaos of the past 6 months, I'd been so focused on my war with my parents that I'd barely noticed the distance growing between Marcus and me. We still lived in separate apartments, still had dinner together twice a week, still attended the occasional work function as a couple. But the easy intimacy we'd once shared had been replaced by careful politeness, as if we were both afraid of saying the wrong thing. What do you mean? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his way of buying time when he was nervous. Sarah, I love you. I've loved you for 4 years, and I want to marry you, but I can't marry. The person you've become. The words hit me like a slap, mainly because they weren't unexpected. I'd seen the way Marcus looked at me lately, with concern, with disappointment, with something that might have been fear. I'd become someone harder, someone who could evict her own parents from their dream home and sleep soundly afterward. So, this is an ultimatum? I asked, crossing my arms defensively. This is me being honest about what I need in a partner, Marcus said. I need someone who can forgive, someone who believes in second chances, someone who doesn't hold grudges until they turn poisonous. And you think I'm poisonous? I think you're in pain, he said gently, which somehow hurt worse than if he'd just called me names. I think you were so hurt by what your parents did that you decided to hurt them back, and now you don't know how to stop. But Sarah, revenge, isn't healing. It's just another way of staying stuck in the moment when they hurt you. I wanted to argue with him, to defend my choices and explain why my parents had deserved everything that had happened to them. But sitting in my kitchen, looking at the man I'd planned to marry, I couldn't find the words. Your father nearly died, Marcus continued. And instead of that being a wake-up call about what really matters, you're still playing games about whether you'll visit him again. You're still holding on to this anger like it's the most important thing in your life. It's not that simple, I said weakly. Isn't it? Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a photo I'd never seen before. A picture of us from 2 years ago at his company Christmas party. In the photo, I was laughing at something he'd whispered in my ear, my face bright with genuine joy. I looked happy, carefree, like someone who believed the world was full of good things waiting to happen. This is the woman I fell in love with, Marcus said. This is the woman who cried when we watched videos of soldiers surprising their families. This is the woman who volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend because she couldn't stand the thought of dogs being lonely. Where is she, Sarah? Because I haven't seen her in months. I stared at the photo, barely recognizing myself. When had I stopped volunteering at the shelter? When had I stopped watching sentimental videos? When had I become someone who could look at her father in a hospital bed and feel more satisfaction than concern? I needed to stand up for myself. I said, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Standing up for yourself and becoming cruel aren't the same thing, Marcus said. You could have confronted your parents about their favoritism without destroying their lives. You could have set boundaries without buying their dream house just to hurt them. They hurt me first, and now you've hurt them back. You've hurt them more than they hurt you if we're keeping score. Your father is in the hospital, your mother is sleeping in chairs and eating vending machine food, and they've lost their daughter along with everything else. So congratulations, Sarah. You won. Are you happy? The question hung in the air between us. Was I happy? I thought about my beautiful rental property, generating income every month from the young family who loved living there. I thought about my parents in their cramped apartment, struggling to pay rent on Dad's reduced income. I thought about Jake, probably creating new disasters somewhere in Nevada, blissfully unaware of the chaos his last rescue had caused. I don't know, I said finally, and it was the most honest thing I'd said in months. Marcus's expression softened, slightly. I know you don't, and that's why I can't keep doing this. I can't watch you destroy yourself with anger and pretend everything is fine between us. So what are you saying? I'm saying I need a break. From us. From this relationship. From watching you choose revenge over healing. Marcus picked up his jacket from the back of my couch. I'm going to stay with my brother for a while. Give you some space to figure out who you want to be. And if I choose to keep being who I am now? Marcus paused at my front door, his hand on the handle. Then I guess we'll both know that this relationship is over. After he left, I sat in my living room surrounded by untouched Thai food, staring at the photo he'd left on my coffee table. The happy woman in the picture felt like a stranger, someone I might have been friends with but didn't really know anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Carol. Your dad is asking for you again. He's being discharged tomorrow and wants to know if you'll help him get settled at home. Home. The word felt loaded with meaning I wasn't ready to unpack. Their cramped apartment wasn't really home. It was just the place they'd landed after I'd evicted them from their dreams. But the house on Oak Street wasn't home either, despite the fact that I owned it. It was just a symbol of my victory. Beautiful. And empty and ultimately meaningless. I picked up my phone and typed 3 different responses to Carol's message, deleting each one before settling on, I'll think about it. But as I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the debris of my relationship and the echoes of Marcus's words, I realized that thinking wasn't enough anymore. 6 months of thinking had led me to this moment, successful in my revenge, victorious, in my anger, and completely alone. Maybe it was time to try something different. Maybe it was time to stop thinking and start feeling, even if what I felt was more complicated than the clean, simple anger that had sustained me for so long. Maybe it was time to remember what it felt like to be the woman in Marcus's photograph, the woman who believed in second chances and chose love over winning. The question was whether that woman still existed somewhere inside me, or whether I'd buried her so deeply under layers of hurt and pride that she was gone forever. I found myself standing outside the animal shelter on Saturday morning, staring at a building I hadn't visited in 8 months. The familiar sound of barking dogs drifted through the autumn air, and I could see volunteers through the windows, walking dogs and cleaning kennels with the same dedication I'd once brought to this place every weekend. Marcus's photo had haunted me all night, reminding me of a version of myself that felt like a character from someone else's story. The woman who'd cried over military homecoming videos and spent her Saturdays socializing neglected dogs seemed as foreign to me now as a stranger on the street. Sarah? Oh my God, Sarah Chen. I turned to see Rebecca Martinez, the shelter coordinator, emerging from the building with a golden retriever mix on a leash. Rebecca and I had worked together for 2 years, and she'd been puzzled by my sudden disappearance from the volunteer schedule. Rebecca, I said, forcing a smile. How are things going here? Busy as always, she said, but her eyes were studying my face with concern. We've missed you. When you stopped coming, I was worried something had happened. Are you okay? You look different, I suggested. Tired, she said diplomatically. Like you've been carrying something heavy for a long time. The golden retriever, a senior dog named Buddy that I remembered from my volunteer days, approached me with his tail wagging tentatively. He'd been at the shelter for over a year when I'd left, considered unadoptable because of his age, and a minor heart condition that required medication. He's still here, I observed, kneeling to pet him. Buddy immediately pressed against my legs, as if he remembered our weekend walks together. He is. We've had a few families interested, but they always end up choosing younger dogs. I keep thinking, the right person will come along eventually. Rebecca paused. Actually, there's something about Buddy you should know. After you stopped volunteering, he went through a rough patch, stopped eating much, wasn't interested in walks. The vet said there was nothing physically wrong, but we think he was grieving. Dogs remember their favorite people. The words hit me harder than they should have. I looked down at Buddy, who was looking up at me with those soulful brown eyes that had convinced me to extend so many walks beyond their scheduled time. I'm sorry, I whispered to him, and realized I was crying. I'm sorry I disappeared. Rebecca handed me a tissue from her jacket pocket. Sarah, what's going on? This isn't like you. So I told her. Everything. The wedding fund, the betrayal, the house purchase, the eviction, Dad's heart attack, Marcus leaving. Rebecca listened without judgment, occasionally murmuring sympathetic responses, while Buddy sat pressed against my legs as if he could absorb some of my pain through proximity. Jesus, Rebecca said when I finished. I had no idea you were going through all of that. And you've been dealing with it alone? I thought I was handling it, I said. I thought I was finally standing up for myself, finally making people face consequences for their actions. And were you? Handling it, I mean? I looked around the shelter grounds, at the volunteers coming and going with dogs who needed exercise and attention. This place had been my sanctuary for 2 years, the place where I'd felt most like myself, useful, needed, part of something bigger than my own problems. No, I admitted. I wasn't handling it. I was just getting revenge and calling it justice. Rebecca sat down on a nearby bench, patting the spot beside her. Buddy and I joined her, and for a few minutes we sat in comfortable silence while dogs barked in the distance and volunteers chatted with potential adopters. Can I ask you something? Rebecca said eventually. What would the Sarah I knew 2 years ago, The one who spent her Saturdays here, who cried when we had to put down that old pit bull with cancer. What would she think about the choices you've made? The question cut deeper than any criticism Marcus or Aunt Carol had offered. I thought about the woman who'd sat in this same spot 2 years ago, researching wedding vendors on her phone between dog walks. That woman had believed in second chances, in the fundamental goodness of people, in the power of love to overcome almost anything. She'd be horrified, I said quietly. She'd think I'd become everything I used to dislike about other people: vindictive, unforgiving, cruel. So the question is, Rebecca said gently, do you want to keep being the person you've become, or do you want to try being the person you used to be? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Mom's number appeared on the screen, and for the first time in months, I didn't immediately decline the call. Hi, Mom. Sarah? Her voice was filled with surprise and hope. I didn't think you'd answer. I almost didn't. What's wrong? Is Dad okay? Dad's fine. Well, as fine as he can be. We brought him home from the hospital this morning. Mom's voice was cautious, as if she was afraid of saying the wrong thing and making me hang up. Sarah? I'm calling because I have something to tell you. About Jake. My stomach clenched. What about Jake? He called last night. He's in trouble again. Different trouble this time. He owes money to his landlord and his car got repossessed, and he wants to know if we can wire him money for a bus ticket home. I waited for her to continue, but she didn't. And? I prompted, and I told him no. Mom's voice was stronger now, more certain. I told him that we don't have any money to give him, and even if we did, we wouldn't. I told him that he's 31 years old, and it's time he figured out his own problems. The words shocked me more than anything that had happened in the past 6 months. My mother had never, in my entire life, refused to help Jake when he asked. How did he react? About how you'd expect. He yelled. He called me selfish. He said we were abandoning him in his hour of need. The usual script. Mom's voice was sad but firm. But Sarah, your father and I have been talking a lot while he was in the hospital. About the choices we made. About the way we treated you and Jake differently. About what it cost us. What do you mean? We enabled Jake for so long that we forgot how to let him be an adult. And we expected so much independence from you that we forgot you needed support too. We failed both of our children, just in different ways. I found myself gripping the phone tighter. Mom, I'm not telling you this because I want forgiveness, she interrupted. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that we're trying to change. We're trying to be the parents we should have been all along, even if it's too late, to undo the damage we've already done. Buddy nudged my free hand with his nose, and I automatically started petting him while I processed what Mom had just told me. My parents had said no to Jake. After 31 years of enabling his poor choices, they had finally set a boundary. I need to go, I said, not because I was angry, but because I needed time to think. Of course. Sarah, I love you, and I'm proud of you for standing up to us, even though it hurt. You were right to be angry. You were right about everything. After I hung up, Rebecca and I sat in silence for several more minutes. Buddy had fallen asleep with his head on my lap, his warm weight grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in months. What are you thinking? Rebecca asked. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that maybe it's not too late to remember who I used to be. Maybe it's not too late to choose healing over winning. And what would that look like? I looked down at Buddy, then at the shelter building where dogs waited for second chances and volunteers showed up every weekend to offer love without expecting anything in return. I think, I said, it would look like coming home. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of 847 Oak Street, watching Dad install new cabinet handles while Mom arranged flowers in the granite countertop island they'd dreamed about for so long. Buddy lay in his favorite spot by the window, his tail thumping whenever someone walked by. The house was theirs now, not as owners, but as family. After months of difficult conversations, therapy sessions, and tentative steps toward healing, we'd found a different solution. They paid me reasonable rent, enough to cover the mortgage, but not enough to strain Dad's recovery or Mom's new full-time job. Jake, meanwhile, was working at a lumberyard in Vegas, finally supporting himself after I'd blocked all his attempts to contact our parents for money. "The movers will be here at 3, Mom said, glancing at her watch. "Are you sure you have everything you need for the new place?" My new place was a modest 2-bedroom house 6 blocks away, close enough to help with Dad's ongoing health issues, far enough to maintain the boundaries we'd all learned were necessary. Marcus and I had looked at it together last month, our relationship slowly rebuilding on a foundation of honesty rather than the unexamined assumptions of our youth. "I think so," I said, scratching behind Buddy's ears. He'd officially become my dog when I'd adopted him from the shelter, though he spent most afternoons here with my parents. Some bonds, I'd learned, were too strong to sever completely. "Sarah," Dad said, setting down his screwdriver and turning to face me. "I know we've said this before, but thank you for finding a way to give us grace without giving up your power, for showing us that family can be rebuilt on better terms." I smiled, thinking about the woman in Marcus's photograph, the one who'd believed in second chances. It had taken losing everything to understand that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing. It was about choosing to write a different ending to the story. "Thank you for doing the work to deserve it," I said. The house filled with the sound of moving trucks and new beginnings. And this time, we were all choosing each other with open eyes. Crafting and presenting this story required considerable dedication and time investment. If you're finding this content enjoyable, please consider subscribing and activating notifications to stay updated on all our upcoming episodes.